We're still previewing every team in the World Cup in the 32 days leading up to the World Cup, and this is one I have not been looking forward to, mainly because of pronunciations, but we're talking about Tunisia, or Tunisia. They're back at the World Cup, they're hanging out in Group D, and they're like the odd team out, because this group was actually a group at the 2018 World Cup with just Peru instead of Tunisia, so it's awkward. It's like going to the wrong class reunion. But how did Tunisia actually get to its second consecutive World Cup? Well, qualifying out of Africa is incredibly difficult for every team. For Tunisia, it was no different. Their initial group, which you have to win this group in order to get to the next round of qualifying, was Equatorial Guinea, Zambia, and Mauritania. And I know what you're thinking. Why do I care about Equatorial Guinea? Well, how about the fact that in the Africa Cup of Nations, Equatorial Guinea made it all the way to the quarterfinals. So even though you likely can't find it on a map, which no shame, you know, not everybody's a giant geography nerd like me. That's kind of why I'm sitting here. But Equatorial Guinea is not easy to handle. Zambia is a pretty solid team that you probably don't know a lot about either. And Tunisia was able to win its first 3 matches en route to qualifying, although it was uncomfortable. Tunisia had to win its final match against Zambia in order to actually get to the final round of qualifying, because they went on the road to Equatorial Guinea and they lost that match. Equatorial Guinea won 1-0 against Tunisia. That tied them on points, but Equatorial Guinea was unable to beat Mauritania on the final match day. Tunisia got the win, and so they get to the final round. Now, the final round are the 10 winners of these groups, and Tunisia got drawn against Mali, who, while they've never been to the World Cup, is a pretty freaking talented team. A team that you could almost inarguably say is more talented than Tunisia based off of where their players play. The playoff consists of a home and away, and in the away leg at Mali, Tunisia scored the only goal of the entire 180 minutes. And if we can find footage that's not copyrighted that we can show you, it is one of the worst own goals you will ever see. And you just feel bad for Moussa Sissoko, who was playing for Mali. He scores the own goal, he gets a straight red 4 minutes later. Tunisia unable to take advantage of that player advantage for the last 50 minutes on the road. They then come home and they keep Mali out of the net for 90 minutes, even though Mali certainly looked like the better team. Or at least they had a lot more of the ball and were showing a lot more quality on the ball. But I do hate to use that phrase, looked like the better team, because Tunisia, they were more organized. They were incredibly precise. They understood the task at hand, and they avoided making the mistakes that Mali made in order to get themselves back to the World Cup. And this is a theme with Tunisia. They're a model of consistency. This is Tunisia's 5th World Cup in the last 24 years. Before that, Tunisia had only made 1 World Cup in all history. So they have been producing consistent, solid, organized, winning national teams at the African level for the last 24 years, essentially my entire life. These consecutive appearances in the World Cup in 2018 and now 2022 help erase the memory of missing the World Cup in 2010 and 2014, the only 2 times since 1998 that Tunisia has not gone. This is because they seem to be missing the crucial element of more top-end talent that made those Tunisian teams that made 3 straight World Cups back in the early 2000s better than what we seem to have now. But in the 2018 World Cup, Tunisia picked up its 2nd win ever on the World Cup stage. They beat Panama in a come-from-behind effort 2-1. They were inspired by their talisman Wabi Kazri, who assisted and scored a goal in that match. The win against Panama was not the main attraction, though, because Tunisia started the tournament playing against England and actually was tied with England until the 91st minute, until stoppage time, when Harry Kane scored a goal that actually gave England all 3 points and robbed Tunisia of what really honestly would have been its most famous result at a World Cup. But this consistency, this ability to hang, is exemplified even better in the Africa Cup of Nations, because Tunisia has qualified for every AFCON since 1994. And if you don't know too much about the AFCON, it happens every 2 years. And there were Africa Cup of Nations in 2012 and 2013 because they wanted to stagger it. So that's 15 consecutive qualifications for the Africa Cup of Nations. It's an outstanding run. The consistency doesn't stop there either, because in 11 of those 15 consecutive Africa Cup of Nations qualifications, Tunisia has made it to at least the quarterfinal. The bad news is, in 7 of the 11 times they made the quarterfinal, they also lost in the quarterfinal. So Tunisia does struggle to consistently pressure to be the best team in Africa, but they're very consistently there. They did win the whole thing back in 2004, so they do have the glory years to look back in. And of course, that Africa Cup of Nations was in the middle of their run of 3 consecutive World Cup qualifications. That was the best team they'd ever had, but they're coming off a win at the last World World Cup, and they're coming off a quarterfinal appearance at the last Africa Cup of Nations, which was only last year. Tunisia actually didn't look fantastic in that. They finished well behind Mali in their group, which of course they got revenge for that in World Cup qualifying, but they managed to get a nice 4-goal win over Mauritania, a couple of goals from Wabi Kazri. Jaziri dropped the goal in as well, and they got to the knockouts. It's in the knockouts that Tunisia showed perhaps the best single result that would indicate they have the ability to do something special at this World Cup. They beat Nigeria in the round of 16. Nigeria were the most consistent World Cup qualifiers out of Africa up until this qualification, so maybe this defeat to Tunisia is a good indication that something was amiss in the Nigerian camp. But it shows that if you are not up to your A game, Tunisia can beat you. And Nigeria is a very talented team, even if they didn't have it all put together in time to qualify for this World Cup. So what do you take from this? They lost to Burkina Faso in the quarterfinal, they lost to the Gambia in the group stage, but they also beat Nigeria. Well, the main thing you should take from this is that Wabi Kazri is the key player on this team, and if Tunisia is actually going to do anything that makes them notable at all at this World Cup, Wabi Kazri will be in the middle of it. He's the second all-time leading scorer for Tunisia, and he's still in his prime. He can play as a number 10 and as a forward. He played in the Premier League for a couple of years with Sunderland. When they got relegated, he moved to Ligue 1 and has played at the top level of France incredibly regularly with Saint-Etienne and Montpellier ever since. I already mentioned that he assisted and scored the 2 goals against Panama that allowed Tunisia to pick up its second World Cup win ever. That was 4 years ago, and he's going to look to do it again here because that matchup against Australia is a tasty one. Oh, and if you want to see Wabi Kazri in action, I am live streaming every World Cup match on Twitch. We're going to be doing a fun watch along every single day. I'd love to see you there. It's right down in the scary description. But who's around to help Wabi Kazri? Well, Tunisia does have some options, and in particular, they have some options in the midfield, some very talented young players coming through. Hannibal Mejbri, who you might have heard of. Wonder Kid extraordinaire. Well, he plays for Tunisia, already has 18 caps at 19 years old. Anis Ben Slimani is also somebody that steps into the midfield. He plays for Brøndby in Denmark. He's only 21. Tunisia will line up in a 4-3-3 with Mejbri and Ben Slimani hanging out in the middle of the field. The rest of the front line is experienced. This guy named Saifuddin Jaziri, who will normally start in the middle. And then the other winger, essentially outside of Wabi Kazri, is a guy named Yusuf Nsakni. He's the captain. He actually plays in the Qatari League, so there'll be an element of familiarity for whatever that's worth. Perhaps the surprise improving bright spot for Tunisia is the defense. They have a pretty darn good center back, Talbi. He plays for Lorient in France. They've got a fullback named Drager, who's loaned out to Luzerne in the Swiss League. He's actually already scored 3 goals in the Swiss League this year. Now, there are still holes, of course. All the goalkeepers still play in the Tunisian league, which doesn't have the highest level, and the rest of the roster is essentially a fill-in-the-blank from around the Middle East with players from Egypt and Saudi Arabia, the Qatari Stars League, and there are multiple players from the Tunisian league. But they have belief. They certainly understand the system. They play together, and they are very tough. I watched their matches against Mali. They are very, very physically tough. They do not shy away from a challenge, and they can set up a low block and play well out of it. They did it against Mali. And that is the only thing that gives them a chance in this group. Now, their chances of qualifying are low. If you're Tunisia, you have to beat Australia in order to qualify. Maybe your solidity and toughness defensively, and then a bit of brilliance from Wabi Kazri can get you a 0-0 or a 1-1 result if you can get a goal out of that. I think beating Denmark and France does feel like a bridge too far, but remember what Tunisia did against England 4 years ago. If a team comes in out of form, like France is at the moment in particular, and they can't take half chances, Tunisia can keep you from getting full chances. So my takeaway in the note that I wrote down after watching Tunisia's qualifying campaign is that this Tunisian team is better than the sum of its parts, but that is the sort of thing that can get exposed once you get to the World Cup. They play very well at the African level, but they clearly have a ceiling. And if France and Denmark show up and play half as well as they can, Tunisia is going to be in a lot of trouble. And they don't even have a puncher's chance to win the whole thing, so I won't even bring that up. But congratulations on making it back to the World Cup. If you enjoyed this video, I have great news for you. We're doing every single team in the World Cup over 32 days. Here is the playlist, so I just provided your binge material for the next couple hours or something. Get to it. What are you doing?